Hey guys, Thomas Jr. here, aka Mustached. I'm here to review the movie Overlord. I know I'm a bit late, but that's sort of become a tradition on this channel at this point. Anyways, begin this movie on some planes, seeing our main character, Boyce, praying and being all up in the plane. So it appears that these soldiers are heading over to Berlin, somewhere located specifically in Russia, to essentially end this classical war. So there's a photographer with them who's taking pictures, and the men are giving each other shit, as you would probably expect. So the sergeant gives them their little prep, asking them questions about what their mission is. And he says that once they get down there, that they're gonna treat the nasty Nazis as nasty Nazis. They're gonna acquaint themselves. They're gonna get down and dirty on their level. So this movie is very time zone period, and I already know as soon as I googled this that people actually complained about the time frame and what guns were used, but I will not, that doesn't bother me particularly, but whatever. So the plane enters the war zone, and their plane in particular does get attacked and is getting shot at, and everyone starts to actually legitimately freak out. In fact, one of the guys stands up and then he gets shot down immediately. So they are starting to dive down out of control. And Boyce almost falls into the flames that are being combusted into the back of the plane. But he manages to get pushed up and then out of the plane. And eventually he gets his parachute up and falls into the water, and he barely makes it up. I gotta say, for a beginning of the movie, it does a lot to get you into it. It definitely feels like a war zone, but the type of movie this is, it does shift at near the middle-ish end part, but we'll get to that. Nonetheless, so he barely makes it onto the shore, but he does get shot at after a few moments of rest. He comes across his sergeant and his corporal. The sergeant got surrounded and ended up getting killed. He tried to speak up, but the corporal silenced him, and he hunches them both down. So he bumps into three of the other men, one of them being the photographer, this talkative man named Tibet, and I forgot the other man's name, unfortunately. I never caught it in my notes, and I do like to always admit when I make a mistake on my notes. That's always a mustache Tom given, if you will, at this point. So anyways, they're moving along with the photographer in tow, and they're giving each other some more shit, so there's a little bit of banter here. But unfortunately, one of them suddenly steps on a landmine, and then boom, he blows up and is just gone, as they refer to it as. But Boyce, getting blown back, not killed, but just blown black, needs to make his way back to the others, so he needs to use his gun very carefully to check for landmines. So the others that were Tibet also needs to make his way back, and then it kind of makes a little haha, gotta get back though. Anyway, they find a weird body or a weird animal-like thing, and they start discussing on what it is. But they get distracted by a noise and they see a woman moving in the distance, and she tries to flee from them. So Boyce is able to translate, I believe they were speaking French, and starts to guide them. She starts to guide them in deeper into the city. So, the corporal and the three men are moving ahead, and the woman and Boyce are like separated, and then the woman ends up like deeper into the city and eventually gets like a whistle blown, but she doesn't get in trouble necessarily, but she does get stopped by this Nazi captain, whose name I completely missed. If I just called him the Nazi captain, to be honest. Nonetheless, he arrives and gives the woman this bag for some reason. I'm not really ever sure if that was ever explained, but if there is a reason, just, I guess, let me know, because I honestly don't remember if that had any effect on the movie. I might have missed something. It's always a possibility for me missing a lot of things. Anyway. So, the three, so anyways, they eventually, move into a house, and it would appear that the woman that they are with, named Chloe, as we learn, is able to speak English, and they see once they are in the house that the Nazis are killing people in the streets. So Tibet is talking some more about their situation and what they're doing. I believe one of the other men that was with them, I don't remember if it was the photographer or was this other guy named Chase that they were with. So Boyce heads out getting his next little mission, but starts to hear coughing from one of the individuals down the house. So he decides to check it out and sees this infected person with messed up skin, and this is a sort of precursor to what the rest of the movie kind of ends up being about, as well as the mission in general. But that kind of gets pushed aside as Chloe tends to Boyce his injuries. So he starts to talk to her about his parents and how where he came from and where he learned French and stuff like that. But quickly enough, the Russians over here are just come across the place, including the captain as well, and starts to ask this other lady, I guess it was her, I think it was Chloe's mom, or this other woman that was just a caretaker, I'm not sure which one it was, but she was left down there. They also had a boy with them that was upstairs with them, who lets a baseball drop, which does get the guards to check up the upstairs, but they only see the boy, and they kind of just mess with them. But the Russian captain stays behind and flirts with this woman, is gonna take advantage of her, and yes, in a sexual way, I mean. But Boyce has had enough, and he holds a gun to the back of his head. The corporal proceeds to knock out the German captain. So they start to see that what's going on with him being captured, that now they can, yeah. So, Boyce heads up for his next mission, which is heading towards the base where they were told to go. And they keep mentioning this tower specifically. But in the process of moving along, he starts to see that these infected people are brought outside and lit up with flamethrowers to get killed. Boyce then suddenly gets chased by a dog and jumps on the back of this truck, which is carrying a bunch of dead bodies. So Boyce is able to sneak himself outside and into this sort of secret laboratory-like area. So he's hearing all these noises of people suffering, and he's peeking inside the small peepholes and seeing more infected people, or a person. And he's sneaking and hiding around. We get a little jump scare thrown in there as well, with one of the people, like, rushing towards the door that he's in front, like, looking into. He eventually moves into this room where there are a bunch of, like, chemicals and tubes, and, this person inside a brown cocoon-like substance, and he tears it open and hears them and starts to just flee from that whole mess. So he sees this strange vial and decides to keep it for himself and store it away. So he sees, like, this other woman who's, like, deeply messed up, and then he eventually finds one of the other soldiers. I don't know if he was one of the original ones that were with them, but his name was Jacob. And it looked like they were beginning to experiment on him as well, even though I don't think they injected him quite yet. I don't know. They just had a huge thing in his stomach. So, Boyce is able to help him out of this device, and the two of them start to try to flee, and they eventually get out. But they need to get out of through the vents, as they're, like, hearing voices and moving along and so on and so forth. So Boyce and Jacob now return to the others, and he pulls out the vial, and they're trying to get information out of the German captain, who does eventually start to speak a little bit of English to help out. Well, not really, but kind of more so mess with them. So Chloe gets mad, stabs him, and then the German captain is hung up to get questioned and then beat down on. But Boyce, seeing this, can't stand the torture and tells the corporal to lay off. He ends up joining the Chloe, or the other woman. I forgot which one he ended up joining, but regardless, he talks to her. I think it was Chloe, but anyways, he ends up talking about how he ended up joining the army. All it was he was given a letter, meaning that he was forced to join, because back then, when you were given a letter, it was essentially you had to go out and essentially, you know, it was that way back then. So after all that gets going, one of the men goes to check up on their captive, but he ends up getting shot because the German captain ends up playing a little dead and then gets killed. So that character, his name was Chase. He ends up getting killed, but Boyce, for whatever reason, he decides to pull out that vial that he had and inject it into Chase, which suddenly breathes back life into him. However, Chase starts to mutate and is able to crush a can with his bare hands, and he starts to mutate further, ripping off his clothes, and he feels the sensation taking over him, and these spikes are like driving out of his back, and he was becoming super strong, able to push off anyone that approaches, including Boyce. So Boyce does eventually come up with the gun and then slam Chase's head over with his gun over and over again until he's for sure dead. So, this little distraction ends up allowing the German captain to escape with the kid in tow. And there's an ambush outside waiting for them. So, Boyce tries to step up, and Tibet backs up Boyce's plan to suddenly save the kid. I will say, including in that ambush, that the German captain was shot in the process of that, which is why when he returns, he ends up injecting himself with two of these mutation vials. So our main team splits up, and Chloe starts to get their attention, and when they move along, Corporal and Boyce take that individual out and then bring him back to the rest of the squad with his mouth covered and him essentially being taped to the vehicle. The person checking him out removes the tape to reveal his mouth was filled with grenades. The pin, part of the tape, so that when they pull the tape off, they also pull the pin off, and the entire truck of grenades and other various explosives goes off. And then Tibbet and his the other guy that was with them. I'm not sure which one it was, but was it Jacob? I think it was Jacob that was with them at this point, and they begin to open fire. Anyways, Chloe begins to go off on her own to save the kid, while Boyce and Cap, I'm just gonna call him Corporal, or he does kind of end up getting a little bit of Captain America, but I'll get to that soon. Anyways, she shoots down, that being Chloe, she shoots down one of the men and asks the other guy to essentially help her find the boy. Meanwhile, the corporal kills this radio transmission guy, and Boyce, in the process of moving along, ends up finding Chloe kind of out of nowhere. I'm not sure if he was trying to do that, but he ended up doing it. Nonetheless, the two of them end up moving along, and then Chloe, though, ends up getting dragged into one of the rooms by this creature. So, she's there with the boy, and then Boyce trying to help her as well. Boyce ends up, kind of already separated, so he ends up trying to finish the job elsewhere. But another creature or zooming object moves behind him, or in front of us, but behind him. He's moving away from the camera at this point. Chloe is being tossed around by this creature with super strength, and she shoots at him, and eventually does get the job done by herself, and ends up getting away. So she picks up the flamethrower, knowing that the creature will eventually come toward her, still getting up after that, the gunshots, and burns it down. So the corporal runs into the German captain, who crushes his little timer that he placed there, and Boyce gets stopped by the scientist, the one that I assume created the serum in the first place. So the German leader speaks to the corporal in his deformed mouth way, while Boyce attacks the scientist and then eventually kills him. So meanwhile, the kid that's by himself ends up running across a field where there's a bunch of gunfire going back and forth, and Tibet sees this and then saves the kid, but ends up getting shot in the back. Not a serious fatal injury, but an injury nonetheless. So the German captain hooks up the corporal up into the chest, and proceeds to mock him in the same way that he did earlier, that being now the roles are reversed. So he ends up getting shut up by Boyce, and he throws Boyce across the room. The Cap is unable to is able to hook himself off from the hook. Meanwhile, the German captain is pushing Boyce into this water. Somewhere in the process, I actually forget where this happens, but the corporal was injected as well. I think that it happened when the German guy hooked him up. He injected him on purpose for whatever reason. So that was what allowed, I think, to him to unhook himself, and then eventually fight back, stabbing the German with this pipe, and then the two fight back and forth. Boyce shoots this flame tank that the corporal kicks towards him, and then the corporal proceeds to lock himself in the room because he was deeply infected, with the German corporal captain with him as well. So he tells him to run, and then the place starts to blow up because the detonators, I guess, still had, even though the detonator kind of was destroyed. That part was definitely probably the most confusing part. I'm not sure what caused the explosion. I think Boyce at some point also might have set off a separate detonator, maybe? I don't remember when he would have done that, but nonetheless, it does eventually blow up, and then he does eventually Boyce get out of the radius. So he meets up with Tibet and the other two, and he rejoins the team. And when he meets with this relief person, he essentially lies about everything that happened so that this can all get buried underneath a huge rug. And the movie ends with them getting prepped up to actually going over to attack Hitler specifically. And that's how the movie ends. Now there were, as I mentioned, a few things I might have missed closer to the end of the movie that just didn't make it a little bit more confusing. But overall, I would say that this movie was still enjoyable. I still enjoyed it. I think there was enough banter between the team that we do see when they land. And the shift in tone between this sort of being this infiltration mission, and then it being between, but if I were to make a obvious comparison, I did kind of slip up at some point and called the corporal captain, as in Captain America, which would make the German captain Skullface. It is very akin to that, I would say. I kind of respect the corporal's decision to sacrifice himself and get rid of all that nonsense. He wasn't ready for that. Again, there were just a few things I might have missed, like how the place blew up. Again, I assume that Boyce at some point might have done something to get that to happen. I just don't remember when that would have happened. So a few things that could be easily missed, because there's a few things going on here. But I do definitely enjoy this sort of mix between this sort of horror element of this these infections and injections and changes, and sort of this more old school esque type of movie kind of coming together. So I'd give it a 7 out of 10. I enjoyed it. So that is my review of Overlord. And if you enjoyed my review, then please feel free to comment and subscribe. Also make sure to check out that link in the description, or head you over to my Patreon page, and any donations are greatly appreciated. Until next time, everyone, bye!